So the first thing, if you've been through the map gallery, you've probably seen that there's a lot of text on the maps. You can have everything from titles to grids and graticules. You've got charts and tables. All of that is normally stored within the layout. What we're looking at here today is labels. So things that are labeling features on the map and then converting them over onto annotation. So your question is, labels or annotation? What do you need? Can you have a combination of both, or do you need one, or do you need the other? So first, looking at labels, labels are dynamic. Every time you pan or zoom on your map, you change the extent in any way, the label engine is going to redraw those labels. They're managed as a group. You have label classes within your map. You can divide those up using SQL queries and have them for intermittent streams, permanent streams, big cities, small cities, only a focus area that you're looking at. You can divide them up any way you want. They're linked to a feature. So if you have a layer of historic buildings and a new one joins the register, you put in a new feature, you get a new piece of annotation. There's a horrific fire, one burns down, it is removed, that feature is taken off, and the label goes with it. One gets put on a tractor trailer and moves, the label goes with it. So they are a property of the layer, so you can go into the layer and set everything up, and that goes with it, stored as a layer file or in the map document. Annotation, on the other hand, is static. Once it's created, it's not moving anywhere unless you go into an edit session and move it yourself. It may or may not be linked to a feature. When you convert it over from a label to annotation, if you choose standard annotation, you've broken that link. It stands alone now. If it's feature-linked annotation, you've maintained the link. If you delete it, it's gone. If you add a new one and populate the attribute field that that annotation was based on, you will get a new piece of annotation. It can be a graphic or a feature. If you're looking at map annotation, which we'll look at next, it's a graphic. If you have geodatabase annotation, whether it's a file geodatabase or an enterprise geodatabase, it's a smart feature. It's a row in the attribute table. And again, we can store it in a map document or in a geodatabase, and we'll look at that in the demo. The workflow we see most often for creating annotation is starting with labels. So you use either the standard label engine or the Maplex label engine. It doesn't matter which one. You get the labels as close to possible as being perfect, and then you convert them over to annotation. Then, once it's annotation, you can go in and tweak them to your heart's content, and they'll be perfect, exactly where you want them. You don't need to do this. You can also create an empty annotation feature class and just start manually putting these pieces of annotation in. But if you're doing it for a fairly large extent, why not start with labels and get them as close as you can first instead of creating them? So we start with our labels, and then we have a choice, map annotation or geodatabase annotation. We're going to look at what these are, map annotation and geodatabase are, what the difference is, and kind of how to make that decision on where you're going to put it. Personally, I'm going to recommend geodatabase annotation, just because map annotation, once you've made that decision, you're kind of stuck with it. So map annotation, we recommend, that you're only doing it for a few pieces of annotation, and this is why. It's only for use in a single map document. Once you've converted to map annotation, that's it. You cannot share that annotation alone with your coworkers. You cannot share it with another map. It lives in this MXD and it's not going anywhere. Stored as graphics. And when you go to edit those graphics, you can only do it with the draw toolbar. I don't know if you're familiar with the draw toolbar, but pretty well the only choices you have are to move it. You can go in, resize it a little bit, but once you've entered into geodatabase annotation and you're using the normal editing workflow, you've got so much more available to you. And we'll go and take a look at that. You've got annotation groups, so it is divided up. It's not just dumped into one group. You do have annotation groups that will correspond with your layers. And you can link the visibility of these groups to your layers. So in the case of Oregon here, if I zoom out and I have a scale range on Oregon, I can set my labels to mimic that and disappear at the same time Oregon disappears. Map annotation also requires a reference scale. You may or may not have worked with these before if you're just using labels, because it's an option with labels. They don't require a reference scale. But the reference scale is a scale that you're going to want to consider for where you're going to print your map at, what scale, or if you're using web maps, where are you expecting people to be viewing your maps? What scale? Because when you convert to Anno, if you have a 12-point font label, it's 12-point at that scale. So if you've got a reference scale of 200,000, 12-point, 200,000, you zoom in, the text gets bigger. You zoom out, the text gets smaller. So you really need to know how your users are going to be using that map. Geodatabase annotation. I like this one better. So this is a feature class in a geodatabase. It's a standard geodatabase, file, personnel, or an enterprise geodatabase. You can reuse it. I can send my geodatabase annotation down the hall to somebody else to use how they want to use it. I can send the whole thing. I can send the feature class. I can put it in different maps of my own. Map annotation, you can't do this. Again, it has a reference scale. All annotation has a reference scale regardless of where it's stored. And geodatabase annotation, you can just pull it into the map, just like a layer. You drag and drop it over from your catalog window. And like a layer, that they're ordered in their draw order in the table of contents, annotation works the same way. So I have some annotation that I want drawn always on top. I put it at the top of my table of contents. If I want it kind of hidden behind other features, I can layer it that way just by reordering in the table of contents. You have your choice, standard or feature linked. So the standard annotation, again, you don't have a link to the features. The feature linked, you have that live link. It is maintained through a relationship class. With this, you need to keep in mind licensing. You need a standard license to create feature linked annotation. So just in case you have clients in your company, some using basic, some using standard and advanced, if they want to be creating feature linked annotation, they do need that standard license. And with geodatabase annotation, you do have access to the standard editing environment. You've got the templates, you've got the tools, it's all in one place. So once you go to edit annotation, it doesn't matter if it's standard, feature linked, you created it from the standard label engine or the Maplex label engine, you do have control over these features. You can start moving them. So in the case of the first example, I stacked to 4 when I was labeling, and I've decided I'd really just like to stack down to 3. I can move this guy up, and I can align these 3 so that they move across the roads. A lot easier to read that way. One last thing that's maintained when you convert over to geodatabase annotation is annotation classes. So if you spent the time and you created label classes using SQL queries and different text symbols for your labels, you're not going to lose that. They are going to pull across to the annotation classes. So you can see here with my Louisiana data frame, I had my cities and I divided it up into large and small, and that just mirrors over to the annotation classes. So, a couple things when you're converting label to annotation that you need to take into consideration is, what are you converting for? Are you doing individual layers in the table of contents, or do you need annotation for all of them? You can do it all in one fell swoop. You need to consider your reference scale. So where are people going to be using your map? Your storage location. Are you going into the map because you only have a few pieces of annotation? You're okay with not sharing that. It's basically disposable. Or are you going out to a file geodatabase, an enterprise geodatabase? Where are you going to be storing this? Is it feature linked or is it standard? Do you need the relationship class? Do you need it to update? Is your data updating on a regular basis that you need this annotation to change? Appending to existing. So just like appending into a regular feature class when you're editing, you can append into annotation. So you've got an annotation feature class of all of Canada, and now you're just working through province by province and converting your labels over. you can append into that and just keep building on that one feature class. And then retaining your unplaced text. If you've used the labeling toolbar and you're setting up your labels, I don't know, some of you may have used the show unplaced labels. You click it, you get them all in red, and you see just how far you have left to go to get them all on there. You do get to a certain point where you just can't use those properties to get the text on, and that's normally when you convert over to annotation because you want to do that hand editing to get them on. Keep that unplaced text, because when you start editing, you can go in and just display the unplaced text, zoom to it, and place it by hand, instead of trying to remember over your huge extent which areas had problems. You just pull up the unplaced annotation window, go through them one by one, zoom to them, and then figure out how to fit it in. All right, we're going to quickly go through a little demo. So going through, we're just going to take a quick look and see what we've got here. We've got our cities labeled and our rivers and some water bodies. I'm using the Maplex label engine. You can see here we're using Maplex and we're using the best quality. None of this matters going between standard and Maplex. It's all the same for converting labels over to annotation. If you've converted labels to Anno, you normally come in and right-click on the layer, come down to convert labels by Anno. This is going to do it one by one. Every tech workshop you go to, the presenter probably has one takeaway that they kind of want you to go home with, and this is mine. You can do these all at once. So if you have a whole ton of layers that you need annotation created for, don't go one by one through them. Come up to the data frame, right-click, and convert labels to annotation. You're going to get the full list, and you're not going to have to go back and forth through. The other advantage to this is when these convert, it sends it out again to the label engine, and now they know about each other. Because when you start going through and converting one by one, it becomes annotation, and then the label engine needs to then use that as a block to the labels, and it changes how it's going on behind the scenes. This just takes the labels and does it all at the same time. So starting at the top, we have the reference scale that I mentioned. So what this is doing is just pulling from the data frame scale. If you have a reference scale set for your data frame, it will go there first and pull that. But because I don't have a reference scale set, it's pulling from the present scale. First choice we have to make is where are we storing it? Are we going to a geodatabase or are we going in the map? We're going into a geodatabase. We're going to create features in this example just for features in the current extent. If you do all features, you're going to get the entire feature layer. So depending on what you're doing, keep in mind it might take a little bit longer than you're expecting. You also have the option of just selected features, but I don't have any selected, so it's not becoming active for me. We have here feature linked. So if you uncheck it now, this one's just going to be standard annotation. And you can see at this point, I get a browse because I can store it anywhere, any geodatabase I want it to go into. With feature linked annotation, because of the relationship class, it needs to live beside the feature layer. So in this case, they're all in my Oregon geodatabase, so they're all going to go there. I don't get to choose where they live. I can append just by checking this, and then it'll append in. The last option, this one that you just saw blank, this is annotation feature class properties. So these are what you need to worry about when you're feature linking and you're planning on editing. But we do have a symbol collection in the annotation feature class. And if we check this, that we're requiring the symbol to be selected, we're kind of locking down our users that they need to use the symbols that exist here. They can't go and start creating hot pink symbols. They need to use what's there. You also have the option that you're going to create annotation when new features are added or when the shape is modified. So if you have a polygon and your lake is nicely labeled and it's feature linked, and it starts drying up, and you rework the boundary. So now your if it was standard annotation, you'd have your lake polygon and your label, your piece of annotation would be extending past. It wouldn't mirror the feature. If you check this and the feature shape changes, the annotation is going to replace using the label engine that it was created with, and it will shrink down or move over entirely if it needs to. And then if you're getting into enterprise, you've got your configuration keywords that you can choose from. So by default, it just comes up as city anno, like the name of the feature class plus anno. So, and this is the one I mentioned if you're going to be editing your annotation. Convert unplaced labels into unplaced annotation. That's, you do want to keep that on because you can then just zoom to those pieces of annotation and place them really easily. So if we convert that, it's going to run through. It's real quick because we're just doing the extent. And it's really a what you see is what you get experience. That where those labels were placed, they're going to place for the annotation is again. If you, on the off chance, do have a situation where you're not getting a WYSIWYG experience, give us a call because we need to take a look at that. So you can see that once that was converted, we have the annotation and the label class. It's default if we didn't have label classes set. And then here you can see we did have label classes set up with SQL queries for the different size cities, and those do come across as annotation classes. So now I can go through and I can start turning them on, I can start turning them off. I've got a lot of control over those annotation groups. So if we turn those off, I just want to show you real quick your other option. So we're just going to do cities, and we'll convert over. This time we're going to the map. So we start losing our options. We're still going to do current extent. There's no feature linking. You can still convert those over and get them on the map. Convert them real quick. But the main thing I wanted to show you is just where that lives, because we're no longer going out to a new feature in a geodatabase. It's now stored in the map. Come down to data frame properties. It's on the annotation groups tab, and this is what we just built. So you can see we lost all of our work creating those label classes. It's now just lumped into one. The only real control we have is we've associated it with the cities layer. So cities disappears due to a scale range, this disappears as well. And that's pretty well it. Or you can set your own scale range, that the cities may still be there, but you don't want the labels to show if you're past a certain range. The other option I wanted to show you, this is when you're getting into really large extents. Like this demo has just been really small. If you're getting into serving up to the web and you're dealing with worldwide data, you don't want to be converting labels to anno in here. You want to start looking at tiled labels to anno, and this is going to run through your entire extent using a tile system and do it one by one. So that's in the Cartography Tools toolbox under the Annotation toolset. You've got tiled labels to annotation. It takes an input grid, so you can use the tool above it, Map Server Cache Tiling Scheme to Polygon, to create that grid. Or if you're using data-driven pages and you have an index grid, you can use that. You can put that in. We also have contour annotation, contour labels, and then you need to convert it over to annotation, and then you need to create a mask to go behind it to mask out the contour line, but you don't want to mask out the land use underneath it. You just want the contour line gone. If you use this tool, it'll go through and do that all in one fell swoop. It'll create labels for your feature class and the masks, tie it all together, and you're good to go. All right. So pulling it all together, you've got your options when you're putting your text on your map. When you're dealing with feature-based stuff, you've got your labels, and then you can convert over to map anno or geodatabase anno. And the workflow we went through was just labeling and then converting over, and then you would continue on editing. And then your differences between map anno and geodatabase anno. So if you have minimal text little editing to do, and you're only planning on using it in one map, go with Map Anno. If you have a lot of text and you want to spend a good couple days editing it and getting it just right, and you want to share, Geodatabase Anno.